So we're starting this video at 6:15. It's called Deaf Parented Interpreters, a challenge to the status quo in sign language interpreter education. So that's going to go in 3, 2, 1. So in research, there's a lot of discussion about native speakers, and we're not really sure what to mean or what to make of it. So is native just people who are born and then sign? Um, no, not exactly. People who start signing at 3, 4, 7. So that's really what that means is native speakers. So that's what we mean when we're explaining native signers. That's who we have in mind. And who here is a native signer? Show hands. So when your parents, you're a baby and you start signing to them, that's a native speaker. So you grow up with signing. It's not an automatic thing that's given to all of us codas just because we're hearing. We get dismissed saying, "Oh, you're not a native signer." But why is that different if your language is signing or whether you're a coda? Another type of language user is heritage language user that gets ignored in the deaf community. So parents' home language, that home language is different than. So like I went to go sign ASL, and then when I would go to school, I'd go in English. But when I'd go home, I would use my heritage language. I was a heritage language user. So I learned that language from my parents when I went home to sign. But at the same time, I did survey about 751 interpreters whose parents were deaf. I asked them, how often do you interact with other deaf people? Not just your parents, but other deaf people. And let me find the exact number. Just 7% said that they interacted with other deaf people at least once a week. So for others, it's not just their parents, but the point of this is that the use of language in this is really limited outside of their home. So their language is kind of fitted to match their parents' language. And there's a lot more variance in sign language. And so when you get out there, you will start to match up your language with those other users. And that's just because of your background, the way you grew up. So you're still a native user if you just speak with your parents because you're still absorbing your parents' language. Not a great interpretation. So let's suppose I want to go take an ASL class and I'm learning signs at home for my parents. So I take an ASL class and I'm sitting there and I see that it's not a native user. So they're teaching vocabulary that's different than my home signs. And that did happen to me, where I asked to go take an ASL 2 class, and at the time, I'm sitting there, and I think, and I thanked the person who let me sit there because I feel like I learned a lot. Because before I got in there, I didn't know as much about the language and how it connects to English. So for that language to be picked up, you need 3 areas. The first is the home, second is school, and third is the community. Those 3. So when you get involved in all 3 of those, that means there's a lot of variance in your language. If you're deaf from hearing parents, a lot of times it can depend. If you're hearing from deaf parents, sometimes you don't get all three. So, you get home, you get community, but you don't get school most of the time. So that's, I think, a good example of how language gets picked up and how your main language is different from the area that you pick it up in. When I was 18, I needed a job, or I worked at JOB, and it's because I loved shoes, and I also loved beer. Don't tell my mom. So I thought, well, what do I do? I don't have any skills. I don't have anything. But I am a heritage language user with ASL, and I already have experience, trading languages at a club. So that way I could go buy shoes and drink beer, but I couldn't get any money from that. I tried, and it didn't work. So I needed a job, and I felt like I could become an interpreter, and I did at the age of 18. At that time, the ADA had just passed, and they needed me, and they still need you. They need all of us, really. So at the time they had passed, they said, "Oh, we need everyone." So the door opened, and I got my foot in the door. So it looks like I'm not the only one that happened to. Out of that 751 that I surveyed, about 80% were the same, where that happened. Their goals, they didn't want to take classes and train for it. It just kind of happened. So it's hard to see the numbers, but that's the time and the age. The age is 16 to 60. So it's mostly people who are under 25 when they first enter it. So who's the same as me that happen to become an interpreter under the age of 25? Yeah, that's a lot of us. So my presentation is really about interpreter education. So why haven't I spoken about it so far? Well, here's the next step here. So that blue part of the graph, that 58%, those are people whose parents are deaf or are hearing themselves who went into an ITP and graduated. That's 28% out of 751. So if I surveyed interpreters who themselves, their parents are hearing, it would probably be the opposite, where 17% or most people got into an ITP. So is that acceptable? Does that mean people whose parents are deaf don't need training? No, not at all. We need training and we want training. So I did that survey again and again and again. And my interpreter parent, I told my parents that I really want interpreters to fit our needs. So of the few people who did not complete it, I asked them why. There are some examples. One woman said that she wanted to get a degree with training, and in her home area there wasn't really an ITP available, and so she had to drive an hour and a half a class and then come home. And her goal was to become an interpreter after her kids had become 18. So she would drive an hour and a half, go to classes, then come back home. Some of her classes required socialization with the deaf, and you have to put down mark down your socialization time with the deaf. And at home, she didn't have that because she already had 3 years interacting with deaf people, and so she doesn't need any more of that. So that teacher required a specific event that you have to go to certain specific events. Take up your weekends, and yeah, she's trying to spend time with her family, and it's trying to balance it out. So she spoke with her teacher. Do you mind if I just go to deaf events in my area? And the teacher was really stubborn and said, no, we have to all go to the same one. So she quit because the purpose of that social interaction didn't really match up with her needs. And that's why some people, don't always persevere and graduate through ITP programs. So that was a long time ago. Uh, People who, would become interpreters to get beer money. That's done. Now, if I'm a senior now and I graduate high school and I go into college, I have to work at McDonald's or something else. I can't just become an interpreter because a lot of times they require RID certifications or state licenses, and so they require all these licenses and certificates or degrees. Or you can go through alternate pathways, and that's fine, but that requires a lot of training and a certain amount of hours of interpreting as well. And so, how do you get documented interpreting time? And so that's the struggle with it, with my experience. So you look at me and you say, "Oh, I don't know what I'm talking about," and that's true. I don't. I never went to an interpreting training program myself. I never experienced sitting there in the hot seat and letting others sort of view my work. I never remember the first time I saw someone signing. I don't know what that's like. I don't know what that kind of training should look like. And maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. And that's part of the big picture, is that I'm recently realizing that I'm teaching a class for my fall schoolwork, and I've never even met a person whose goal was to become an interpreter, but they haven't started the process, the pre-interpreting process, who isn't a coda. I've never met a person like that, and I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what their motivation's supposed to be. Yeah. So, I mean, like, if I were to see someone like that in a class, I would say, who are you? Try to give me an idea. I haven't had that experience. So if anyone knows of someone like that, here's the flip side of it: is and you don't know their experiences as well. So you grab time and you open the door to talk with them. What's your needs? What's your skill set? We all have skills that we bring. Everyone works hard, and we all have the same goal. But we need more open and honest dialogue about our language, about our variance in language, um, about our resiliency, about who we are. And it's because of this next slide that we need that. So that little girl needs us to work together to train for her future. And the little boy next to her is looking at her saying, like, how is she doing that? And they both need us to make changes for the better. And we can't change without open discussion, without open, brave dialogue. That's it.